One of the best things you can learn as a writer is plotting techniques. Now, I'm not talking about story frameworks, although those are good to learn too, but more like individual techniques that guide you through the storytelling of your book. In this video, we're going to talk about 7 of those techniques, and I guarantee you're going to be able to use at least 1 or 2 for your work in progress. The first one we'll talk about might be the most useful one of all. It is breadcrumbing. Breadcrumbing is when you drop periodic hints throughout the book, so that when the reader reaches the end, it feels both expected, but also surprising. You would think that you can't have both, right? You would think it can't be expected, but also a surprise. But if you use the technique of breadcrumbing correctly, it will feel that way. Now, Gillian Flynn is best known for Gone Girl, but for this example, we're gonna draw from another one of her books called Sharp Objects. Flynn uses the novel of breadcrumbing so well in this book. And, spoiler alert here, a dollhouse is very important to the ending of the story. And so what she does throughout this book is just layer in that dollhouse throughout the entire narrative. And the reader never suspects anything. They just think like, oh, it's just a dollhouse. But Adora plays with the dollhouse in front of Camille. They move the dollhouse to the porch at one point. The characters recuperate next to the dollhouse. And then there's also a scene where they smash the dollhouse. So Flynn has basically been setting you up this whole time for the dollhouse being an important object. But I don't think anybody reading that book or watching the television series would suspect like, oh, this dollhouse is going to contribute to the solving of the murders. So this is just a little reminder that whatever your book is building towards, whatever it is leading up to, you want to be breadcrumbing that from the very beginning, just layering it in almost every single chapter. Don't worry, it will still feel surprising to the reader, but they'll also feel like, oh, I should have seen that coming. I should have expected that. This next plotting technique that we're going to learn is really good if you are struggling with the ending of your book, and it is number 2, palindroming. If you are struggling with what to do with the end of your book, I'm going to give you a very important tip. The secret to what happens at the end of your book is already embedded in the beginning of your book. And here's what I mean by that. What you want to do is you want to close the doors in your novel in the reverse order from how you open the doors at the beginning of your book. What this does is it makes your book feel like a palindrome, like the word madam or taco cat. Words and phrases like that read the same whether you read them frontwards to backwards or backwards to forwards. So here's an example of what this looks like in a plot. Let's say the beginning of your book starts with a love interest, perhaps. And then you move on to the main plot problem. Let's say it's zombie dragons attacking. And then the third thing you do is develop a friendship. And maybe it's a sidekick or maybe it's a mentor character. Okay, so if that is the order of the beginning of your novel, 1, 2, 3, what you want to do is just reverse that for the ending of your novel. So that means the first part of the ending of your novel is the conclusion of the friendship story. Is there a betrayal by the friend? Is there a death by the friend? Is there a sacrifice by the friend? And then the next thing you would do is you would resolve the zombie dragon storyline. So let's say our hero saves the world from the zombie dragons. And then lastly, you would resolve the very first thing you brought up at the beginning of your novel. So maybe your hero wins the love interest. Now, if for some reason that you find that that order doesn't work at the end of your book, I would suggest going back to the beginning and be like, do I really have the right order of introducing plot elements in the beginning? Should I change that up? Hey, other than these YouTube videos, I do have 2 other ways I can help you write your book. The first is Bookfox Academy. It is a collection of 10 courses which gives you all the tools that you need to write the best book possible. And then the second way I have to help you is BookFox LAB, which is my coaching and mentorship program. If you want a coach to walk alongside you and give you feedback on your book and guide you along the process of telling your story, this is it. You should join. All right, now let's get to the next technique, which is number 3, question first storytelling. There is a secret to getting your reader to want to read more of your book. And the simplest way I can talk about that secret is just to say you need to raise questions in the reader's mind. So what I'm going to encourage you to do is to treat your scenes with a question first methodology. Essentially, you want to design your entire scene around a question that might not be explicitly mentioned in the scene at all, but nonetheless, it appears in the reader's brain like, I wonder about that. So that means the first thing you need to do whenever you're writing a scene is to ask yourself, what is my scene question? And then the second thing you should ask yourself is, does this scene question get answered by the end? So let's say a woman is talking to a man and she's trying to convince him of something. So the question for that scene is she going to succeed? Is she going to be able to convince him? And ideally, by the end of that scene, we will either see her succeed and, he'll be convinced and they'll go along with whatever the plan is, or she's going to fail and he's going to be like, no, I need more evidence, or no, I don't believe you. And you can go through your book and look at every single scene and be like, what is my scene question here? And if you can't come up with a good scene question, that might mean you need to either rewrite the scene or it might mean you need to delete the scene. But if you're struggling to come up with questions for your scene, I think another good approach is just to ask, what would the reader be curious about here? What do they want to know about? And sometimes that will lead you into the space where you can actually formulate, now I know what that scene question is. I love this next plotting technique. I think you're going to love it too. It is number 4. Spaced out TRDs. So Jane Cleland came up with this acronym of TRDs, and essentially it stands for twist, reversal, and danger. And she argues in her book, Mastering Plot Twists, that you want to space out these twists and reversals and dangers because as long as they happen periodically over the course of your story, the reader's going to be hooked and they're going to keep on reading, wanting to get to the next one. Now, what are some common mistakes when it comes to TRDs? One would be not having enough of them. Right? It just makes your book a little boring. But this next mistake I find to be much more common for writers. It's when there's a big gap between TRDs. Say you have a cluster of them at the beginning and then you have a bunch of them at the end, but then the middle part of the novel, there's just this big no man's land where there's nothing like big happening. There's no big surprises. And then the third mistake would be to have a big cluster of TRDs just at the end of your book in the last, say, 20 or 30 pages. The trouble with that is that no one's going to get to that point, because they're going to be bored because there's not enough big revelations in the first, 2/3 of your book. So Cleland argues that in a normal sized book, you would have 4 to 5 big TRDs, and these would be spaced out evenly to keep the reader on the hook. Hey, little teaser here about what's coming down the pipeline. Next week, I'm doing a video on the 7-step process of best-selling authors to make characters coming alive. That's the little cool graphic that represents what I'm going to take you through. So right now, you should subscribe and like this video to make sure YouTube shows you that next one next week. Okay, the 5th plotting technique, the official 5th one, is the pressure cooker. This is a plotting technique which helps you with the climax of your novel. And it basically says that there are 2 elements that really help you to write a good climax. And that is compressed time and compressed space. Compressed time works because, ticking clocks are wonderful for making the reader feel the pressure of we gotta get this done by this time or else all is lost. And then compressed space works because when you cram your protagonist and your antagonist into a very confined space, you have a lot more opportunities to, raise the conflict and for them to squabble with each other and fight with one another. A great example of this would be Panic Room by David Fincher. So the time compression is that Sarah is hiding in this panic room from the robbers outside, but she doesn't have her insulin, right? So that creates this ticking clock as how long is she going to be able to survive as a diabetic. But there's also this space compression because this mother and her daughter are stuck in this tiny little room and the robbers are outside trying to get in to get the treasure inside. And the added detail which makes this even more perfect is that the mother is claustrophobic. So this small space feels even smaller to her. After I give you this next point, every single one of you are going to change something about your book. It is number 6. Twist the knife. So I want you to look at a pivotal tragedy that you either have planned or have already written in your novel. Could be a rejection of love. It could be a major character dying, or it could be a mentor or a friend betraying them. It just needs to be something big that happens in your novel. And maybe you say to yourself like, oh man, I think that part is perfect. Like my stakes are high. They couldn't get any higher. It's wonderful. It's great. I don't need to change anything. But let me tell you that even when you have super high stakes in this critical, pivotal moment in your novel, there's always one thing that you can do, one little tiny thing you can do to make it just a little bit worse. Twisting the knife is a little detail that makes a bad situation even worse. It makes the readers gasp, it makes them never forget, and it really sucks them into your story. And for this, we're going to look at an example from the new Peaky Blinders movie, The Immortal Man. There is a whole group of women working in a factory during World War II, and then a German bomb falls on them and just obliterates the whole factory. So obviously this seems like a horrible circumstance, a horrible tragedy, obviously high stakes because all these women die. But what is a tiny detail that we could add that would just twist the knife in a little way? What if it was one of the women's birthdays and they were singing her happy birthday and they had candles on the cake, and right at that moment, right as she's about to blow them out, they hear the bomb falling, and then boom. That right there is maximum contrast. We have a very happy moment of a birthday celebration, and then the bomb falls. That is twisting the knife. Now, how would you twist the knife in, say, a romantic storyline? Well, say you have a couple, but they are separating or splitting for whatever reason. Okay. On the way out, maybe one of them says, I never loved you. Or on the way out, one of them says, I never found you attractive. Or on the way out, one of them says, I cheated on you. Or on the way out, they leave the wedding ring of the dead mother-in-law on the counter. Every single one of those small little details radically elevates the scene and makes a really bad situation into an even worse situation, something that really will pluck the heartstrings of your reader. All right, now let's get to our very final plotting technique, and it is number 7, practice A.R.M. Now, this acronym comes from James Scott Bell and his book Plot and Structure, and he says A.R.M stands for action, reaction, and more action. And what this is sort of a really basic framework to establish how you have sequences of events inside your novel. You start with some sort of action, then you have another character react to it some way, and then you have more action in response to that. It's a really good way to make sure you have cause and effect in your novel, where every single event is directly leading to the next event. And for an example of this, let's look at The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. The world's been taken over by hungries, which are basically zombies, but one girl is infected and yet still remains human. And she's being kept in this facility and they're doing tests on her to try to figure out why she's so unusual. So let's start with the action. Just to know, Melanie's teacher reaches out and strokes Melanie's hair, and this is skin contact, no gloves. Okay, so what is the reaction? Well, Melanie catches that scent and feels that and has this involuntary hunger response, and it's almost everything that she can do not to go ahead and bite her. Okay, and then what is the more action on the heels of that scene? Well, the program director finds out that Justino has touched Melanie and threatens her with making her leave the program so she'll lose access to all the children. And so the reader wonders, okay, is Justino's attachment to Melanie a danger to everyone? A quick way to summarize what A.R.M is all about is that there has to be repercussions for your character's actions, and every single action needs to lead to a reaction. Just like in Newton's third law of energy, for every action or force in nature, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Hey, don't forget to check out Bookfox Academy and Bookfox Lab to see how I can help you more with your story. And I hope that these techniques armed you with some things that you need to change in your book, or maybe things that you need to write in your book. Happy writing.